To get us started today and to provide more information on the content of the webinar, we have Betsy Morales of the FHWA Office of Civil Rights. Betsy?
Thank you, Nancy. Hello and welcome to the Federal Highway ADA Virtual Peer Exchange on ADA Transition Plan Implementation. My name is Betsy Morales, ADA Program Analyst from the Federal Highway Office of Civil Rights. I will be facilitating today's session. This is our third webinar in a series of 5 to commemorate the 30th anniversary of the passage of the ADA. This webinar series will highlight best practices and innovative approaches being used by state DOTs to implement their ADA transition plans. Today, you will hear from Pete Krause from the Texas Department of Transportation and Sandra Norman from the Virginia Department of Transportation. Today's focus will explore different approaches to using the transition plan in the statewide transportation improvement program planning process to achieve maximum accessibility. To start us out, we are honored to have Federal Highway Director of the Office of Human Environment, Sherry Schaffline. Sherry Schaffline has 34 years of public service spanning tribal, state, and federal government and nonprofit organizations. She obtained a bachelor's degree and a master's degree in environmental science at Indiana University. She has held leadership positions in the Federal Highway Office of Planning, Environment, and Realty for 16 years. Currently, as Director of the Office of Human Environment, she supervises 3 teams with responsibilities for financial oversight of the office research program, accelerating project delivery through application of context-sensitive design principles, implementing the Transportation Alternatives Program, administering procedures and standards for modifying the National Highway System and the Strategic Highway Network, and advancing multimodal connectivity by addressing bicycle and pedestrian networks, mobility innovation, environmental justice, community impacts, and economic development. Please welcome Sherry Schaffline.
Thank you, Betsy. On behalf of the Federal Highway Office of Planning, Environment, and Realty, I'm happy to kick off the webinar and share our office's information that will help practitioners build out a transportation system that provides mobility for all users and abilities. But first, I want to offer my thanks to the Office of Civil Rights for hosting this webinar series and for our ongoing partnership. I'll provide a high-level overview of the transportation planning process, describe how accessibility considerations can be incorporated in this process, and highlight research and training resources that can help practitioners consider the best approach for incorporating ADA transition plan corrective actions in statewide transportation improvement programs, or STIPs. Let me begin by highlighting the regulatory framework for considering and addressing accessibility within the planning process. Federal Surface Transportation Planning law and regulation requires both statewide and metropolitan plans and statewide and metropolitan transportation improvement programs provide for the development and integrated management and operation of accessible transportation facilities and network. There are statutes that establish requirements for statewide planning and metropolitan planning in Title 23, and multiple regulations provide a regulatory framework for considering persons with disabilities in the planning process and in the design of transportation facilities. For example, regulations require that states certify that their transportation planning process is being carried out in accordance with all applicable requirements, including ADA. 23 U.S.C. 217G provides accessibility considerations specific to bicycle transportation and pedestrian walkways. This legal framework lays the foundation to help practitioners employ strategies to remove barriers to accessibility and improve multimodal mobility options for persons with disabilities. In principle, transportation planning is continuing, cooperative, and comprehensive. In practice, it is a performance-driven process by which long and short-range transportation improvement priorities are determined on a regional or statewide basis. And you can see with the graphic on the right side the various feedback loops on that continuous, cooperative, and comprehensive planning. One critical element of the planning process is meaningful involvement from stakeholders and the public at large. This includes hearing from persons with disabilities and entities that represent their interests through this process. Our efforts with states to advance virtual public involvement under the Everyday Counts program is building a lot of new resources to consider. In some cases, there are parallel but separate efforts to develop the ADA transition plan and the statewide or metropolitan planning process. However, these efforts can and should overlap. If we leverage these planning opportunities, we will be positioned to achieve the example goals of removing unnecessary barriers to multimodal accessibility of public rights-of-way and enhancing opportunities for people with disabilities to walk, roll, cycle, and use micromobility services. One approach for accomplishing this goal is to ensure that the information included in ADA transition plans are also included in key transportation planning projects, such as the STIP. While the focus today is on including ADA transition plans in the STIP, it is important to note that accessibility corrective measures are also included in other planning products. The long-range statewide transportation plans, metropolitan transportation plans, public participation plans or public involvement plans, unified planning work programs, and state planning and research work programs can all feed into the STIP or TIP and be used to assess accessibility challenges and needs and to identify possible improvement projects and funding opportunities. These efforts solidify the importance of addressing accessibility during the planning process and can help to ensure programmed multimodal improvements are accessible early in the project development process. The table here notes key transportation planning products, including who develops, approves, and implements them, along with the time horizon and frequency of updates. If state DOTs, NPOs, local public agencies, and other project sponsors elect to use their federal funds for accessibility improvements, the STIP or TIP development process can be used to either add projects that are specifically focused on accessibility or ensure that the projects that are programmed incorporate accessibility components into their designs. The latter involves tracking projects as they proceed through preliminary engineering, environmental review, final design, and construction, all of which would be programmed in the STIP or TIP when federal funds are used. Today's speakers will provide additional information on ADA transition plan inventories and cultivating stakeholder partnerships to address barriers to accessibility, including prioritizing and tracking investments to make the transportation system more accessible. Collectively, information sharing and collaboration with our partners will help ensure that all sidewalks, street crossings, pedestrian signals, and transit stops are accessible to people with disabilities. These are just a few of the FHWA planning, design, and multimodal research resources that can be used to help practitioners in the development of the STIP and considerations for incorporating accessibility during the planning and design of multimodal networks. In addition to the resources on the slide, there are a host of resources and training information available on the Office of Planning, Environment, and Realty websites, including guidebooks, peer exchange reports, webinars, and other resources to help practitioners with planning and implementing accessible transportation networks. This slide notes training resources developed in coordination with the Pedestrian and Bicycle Information Center to address accessibility. Federal Highways developed a pedestrian and bicycle accessibility module for planning and engineering courses offered at the university level, and these materials are available for download. Additionally, our Resource Center provides a course on designing pedestrian facilities for accessibility. In March, we launched a web-based course on bicycle facility design offered through the National Highway Institute, or NHI. The course provides information on how to make bicycle infrastructure more accessible. There's also an NHI course on pedestrian facility design that covers accessibility considerations. In the closing, these are our program websites for additional information. We continue to produce resources to advance equity and accessibility in multimodal planning and implementation, to improve safety, infrastructure, innovation, and accountability. Contact information is provided on each of these web pages if you have questions about any of the program areas. Additionally, to help practitioners, we have planning points of contact within our Federal Highway Office of Planning as well as in each of our state division offices. Thank you to our state, regional, and local transportation partners. You know how important it is to include program investments in transportation improvement programs so that barriers to accessibility can be removed on a national scale. If you have good case examples or lessons learned to share, let me know. We can figure out how to work it into our practitioner capacity building efforts. Remember, each of us plays a role in making our transportation system accessible to persons with disabilities. I look forward to hearing from our partners in Virginia and Texas, and now I'll turn it back over to Betsy to introduce the presenters.
Thank you, Sherry. That was a great way to get us started. We'll have our first poll question right now. All right. So what type of agency do you represent? Please select one. I'll give everyone a few seconds. All right. Let me go ahead and see. So we have about 47% are from state DOTs, 24% from federal highway, and others from municipal or county government. Well, thank you and welcome. Hope you enjoy the session today. Now we're going to hear, Now we're going to hear from our first panelist, Pete Krause. Pete Krause is an RLA, Registered Landscape Architect in the state of Texas. Pete holds a Bachelor of Science in Landscape Architecture from Texas A&M University. He currently works at the Texas Department of Transportation as Director of the Landscape Architect Section of the Design Division. He leads a team of landscape architects involved in landscape design, transportation aesthetic design, and accessible pedestrian facility design. Pete has been involved with accessible design and project development for over 25 years. He has served as ADA coordinator in the TxDOT district office for the last 15 years and has served in the design division of TxDOT, developing accessible designs and standard drawings and managing the department's pedestrian mobility, accessibility, and safety program. The focus of the program is to construct pedestrian infrastructure in the public right-of-way and to maintain a database of information to support the department's ADA transition plan. Please welcome Pete Krause.
Hello, everyone, and thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to you guys. I wanted to sort of give you a brief look at how we intend to incorporate our transition planning efforts into the overall project development process. To get started, I wanted to maybe back up just a little bit and talk about our data collection methodology, because how we collected it and the data, how that data looks is critical to sort of carrying forward our philosophy of planning and prioritization and so forth. So we've conducted a very comprehensive geometric assessment of not only curb ramps, but we're looking at all the sidewalks on our system, paying particular attention to transit stops, and the pedestrian push-button components of our traffic signal systems. Some of our earlier data collection pieces had some subjectivity in there. There was some decision-making that the staff in the field sort of had to make some decisions on. So we really tried to remove that subjectivity out of it, and we really tried to come up with a very consistent and objective data collection methodology. So we developed some tools to help us get there. And then the other thing that we really wanted to do was to be able to integrate that information in with all of our other system planning tools that TxDOT has. So we tried real hard to come up with a system to not only judge what we call the severity score, which would be how bad is the physical attribute, the slopes, the width, all of those things in the standards that sort of drive us to accessible, a good accessible system. But also because it's a map-based, because it's a geodata-based system, now we're able to also factor in what we call our activities or our activity score, meaning, is it, near public buildings? Is it near the schools? Is it, between what we would call, live services? Are these, so we start to use that activity score to help us predict maybe the most used or the most, sort of the higher priority corridors, if you will, for alteration and bringing these things into compliance. But we also wanted to build a dynamic scoring system. So we know things change over time, priorities change, things change. Will our system be able to adapt itself, to those changing needs and still give us, the answers we're looking for throughout the project development process? So we really sort of worked hard on developing that. I want to give an example of sort of get into that just a little bit. And what I'm showing here is basically a matrix of a decision-making matrix that I would call a static prioritization. And in this particular instance, there's 5 columns, and I truncated it sort of at 5 rows. It's just an example. It's not intended to be, anything but just an example of what would be a sort of a static assessment. So column A, the columns are A, B, C, D, F, like the letter grades you get in school. A being, everything's compliant, looks good, should be good to go. B, column B, maybe slightly out of compliance. C, a little worse, D, a little worse, and then sort of that column F is just, does not meet even the basic minimum accessibility requirements. So for example, the top row is the width, say the width of sidewalk, right? Anything over above 48 inch, should be compliant as far as the width's concerned. And so that would be in column A. Anything sort of from 36 to 48 inch, technically compliant with the 2010 standards, but if the proposed right-of-way accessibility guidelines come online, then we would know, hey, we may want to fix that at some point. So that would be column B. There's really nothing in C or D, and then anything less than 36-inch width, falls into that column F. It's really non-compliant. It needs to be, fixed, ASAP. Second row down was cross slope, similar assessment, 2% or less, column A. Anything above 2 to 5 would be column B. 6 to 8, column C, 9 to 12, D, and anything over 12% cross slope would be, considered non-compliant. Again, I don't really want to argue or, discuss the merits of the decision making that sort of made those different buckets, if you will, or priority rankings, if you will, but just to show an example of how that would work. So third column down, vertical displacement, 20, a quarter of an inch or less, should be good to go. Quarter to a half falls in a B. 1/2 inch to 2-inch, C, 2 to 4, D. Anything over a 4-inch vertical displacement would be an F. Again, I don't necessarily agree with these lines that were cut. Just as an example. Fourth row down, vertical clearance, basically a pass-fail. If you have a protruding objects, yes, or if you don't, then you're in an A column. If you do, then somehow you ended up in D instead of F. I'm not exactly sure about that, but again, this was just meaning to be an example of sort of that static collection. Last row down, obstructions. Again, it's sort of a pass-fail. No obstructions, you pass. Obstructions present, in your accessible route, then you're in column F. But you can almost see the guys or the field staff sort of pushing a radio button to put the put the particular asset in one of these boxes or cells on the matrix. But that doesn't necessarily give you the information that you really need. So we developed a sort of again, we collected the raw data. You can still apply those sort of that decision making, but you can sort of move those boxes if you need to. So we can adapt for changing standards or changing guidelines. If the PROAG gets adopted as a standard that says something different than what we expect it to say, then we can sort of reassess everything without going back and recollecting data. So it's not just a radio button, push button, checkbox kind of an analysis. It was a real data collection effort. Again, we've collected lots of different variables. So, we can analyze, basically we can analyze against anything we have data on. The other thing this allows us to do is allows us, particularly on the activity side of the scoring, to adapt to local needs or local conditions. So if we, if we basically, made some assumptions about, what's maybe reasonable, even though we know technically it's not compliant, can we live with it for a little while until we get the resource and so forth to do the total fix. So we've got that ability to sort of move those lines as we need to. Again, it should allow for future flexibility. Again, things change all the time in a crazy world we live in. So, do we need to change sort of our prioritization based on some future need that we may or may not even know about today? So again, we've sort of developed that prioritization matrix, based on what we think is reasonable, and we've had some workshops and gotten some feedback. But again, as we feed this into the overall transition plan and then integrate that transition planning information into our overall project planning process, as Sherry mentioned, there's that feedback loop. We should be going to the community and sort of laying our cards on the table and saying, here's the decision making that we did. Here's the assumptions we made. Are they valid? Are they going to meet the needs of the community? Are they, doing what we think they should do? So we start to incorporate that into the long range, planning efforts. And then as projects sort of come into that nearer term, into that 10-year planning window, we start to put, real dollars and real sort of project, limits and scopes, to these efforts. And then because we have the data, and the data was sort of collected in a way that we can make assumptions about what kind of project it's going to take to fix these things. Some of them may be just minor fixes. Some of them may need a huge, buying right away or spanning a river or something, adding a bridge, that kind of thing, which is a little more complicated in the planning process. But as things come into that 10-year window, we can start to make good assumptions about the cost and integrate, as again, as Sherry mentioned, integrating this whole ADA redevelopment into the overall project process. And then certainly once they get into the STIP, or that 4-year window, now they are definitely financially constrained. We know what the needs are. We start to figure out what the fixes are. What can we do? How can we integrate that back into, take it from the planning to the design level, and work it into our project letting process. So our system gives you a way to to track those assets or track those pieces of information throughout the whole process. So when we think about, okay, what are these projects going to look like? Obviously we do a lot of big, large-scale redevelopments and reconstruction projects on the transportation system. We want to make sure that if we're doing those, that these ADA remediations get tracked in, and they're hardwired into the whole system of project development. It's not an afterthought. It's not something that we might do if we have money left over kind of thing. No, it's an integral piece to that reconstruction project, so it gets tracked through, from planning into design to construction and so forth. We do here in Texas have some dedicated funding sources that are dedicated just for ADA remediation. We've been doing it a number of years, pretty successfully, I think. We've got a lot of old pieces of the highway system that are, not in the 8-10 year window of ever being redeveloped or reconstructed, at least that we know about. So having these dedicated funding sources allows us to come in and fix a lot of that old infrastructure, bring it into compliance, as best we can. That's a good source, and I think the next webinar, I'll give an ad for the next one. I think they're going to talk about funding in a little bit more depth. We also have a lot of projects that are initiated by what I'll call third-party initiated projects. The local government projects, the NPO-driven projects, those projects that do happen on our system, and we need to make sure that included in those projects as well, that they are bringing, our system into compliance whenever they're doing alterations, whenever it's in the scope of the project that they're working on. Utilities companies do a lot of work on our rights-of-way. They seem to like to put their drilling rig right in the middle of my sidewalks and put their utility poles. So we need to be mindful of, utility construction and reconstruction, and digging up water lines. We need to make sure that, the city or whoever's digging it up puts the sidewalk back in a, better condition, or at least as good a condition as they found it. The other thing that goes on in our system is a lot of private development. TxDOT does not necessarily have the power, but the cities have a power to, if somebody's redeveloping a piece of property, they can actually sort of require them to put the public infrastructure and put that sidewalk system in as part of their development plan. And they do a lot of that. And so when we can say, we can show them, yes, there's sidewalk here, but we've got this issue, and this issue that you guys need to fix while you're out there, building in your new facility, whatever it is, restaurant, hotel, apartment building, whatever it is. And usually, particularly as our development's getting a little more urbanized, they're more than happy to do it because they want people to access their properties. So we've also got some state accessibility laws that require a certain level of connectivity from any developments to the public rights-of-way. As I mentioned, we also do a lot of maintenance and operations projects. If you've got it on the radar screen, a lot of these little, what we call the vertical displacements, we have a lot of, because particularly in areas of the state where we have a lot of soil movements, you get a lot of those vertical displacements that are not hard fixes. We don't need to wait, 8 or 10 or 12 years for a major overhaul of the system. We can get out there and fix that stuff, routinely. So that's the other piece, again, if you got the information to back you up and you got the data to support these little projects, you can make sure they get accomplished in a way that's valid. So again, our system allows us to track these assets. If we've got particular things that are out of compliance, we can actually assign them to a planning date or a planning year. Even if it's we don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves because things sort of get unmanageable. But we do want to sort of put those in the planning window, and that way as they come into the design phase, they don't get neglected. They're right there front and center. Oh yeah, by the way, don't forget about fixing all of these things that are out of compliance with the ADA standards. So they get designed into the projects, and then we can track them through the actual construction as well. Things fall out all the time, but we don't want them to sort of disappear or I think we fixed that. I'm not sure. That kind of thing. So again, tracking throughout the whole process is sort of critical to our success. We do have capability of tracking, and I put grievances. It doesn't necessarily have to be a formal grievance. It may be a sort of an inquiry or a request, from somebody that hey, I live over here and I can't get to the grocery store because there's some obstruction in the way. We can track that. We can timestamp it to make sure it doesn't sort of just disappear into the ethos. So we have some real-time ways of tracking this stuff. And then again, just because we set it up for construction doesn't necessarily mean that it got built or built properly. So having that sort of that final inspection and approval mechanism built in to the system, allows us to sort of maintain that quality of delivery. And if things fall out, if they don't make it from planning to design or design to construction or construction to reality, those data points sort of go right back into the bucket, the transition planning. They get reassessed. They get included back in. So it's sort of this continuing cycle. If something doesn't get fixed or doesn't get, maybe we did the best we could. We couldn't quite get to 8%. We got it to 10. We've got a place that we can mark. Put that information. Here's what we did. Here's when we did it. Here's what we ran into. Here's why we couldn't get it 100%. And then that data that we have a repository for that sort of information. So if we get a question or a query later on, we can go back and say, well, here's what happened. So we've got a sort of a record of what we're up to. So again, our process is to track that information throughout the entire process, the whole planning, design, construction, maintenance. They don't necessarily go away just because we build them correctly today. Again, we can sort of track that site-specific information is needed. We've got that management approval, whatever the particular local district office or administration is comfortable with approving, but it's again we've got a record. Yes, it was done on this such and such date, and we've got sort of a track record of what got accomplished. It also allows us then to report out to the public or to federal highways or whoever's interested in. Then we can sort of easily track our progress toward achieving that transition plan. So with that, I think that's my presentation. I will yield my time back or entertain questions if we have any.
Thank you, Pete. That was a great presentation. Before we get into questions for Pete, we have another poll question. Okay, which is, does your agency use your ADA transition plan during the tip-step process? Please, so I'll give you guys a few seconds to answer. All right. So about 54% said yes, 35 said no. So for the ones who said yes, we hope this will be beneficial. For the ones who said no, we hope that you will hear something today that will change that to a yes. So Pete, we have a question for you. Is there suggested language to put in STIP to indicate how projects connect to items identified in the transition plan?
Can you repeat that?
Sure. Is there suggested language to put in STIP to indicate how projects connect to items identified in the transition plan? Pete, are you there?
Sorry, I was on mute. I don't know that we have that particularly written out as such. But again, we definitely do that in our dedicated funding sources, and we have some ways of sort of tracking those projects and tracking those funds, through the process. I hope that answers the question.
Yes, thank you, Pete. Now we'll move on to our second panelist, Sandra Norman. Sandra Norman currently serves as Division Administrator for Civil Rights for the Virginia Department of Transportation, where she is responsible for the civil rights internal and external programs for the third largest transportation agency in the country. Prior to being promoted in this role, Sandra was hired as the Assistant Division Administrator for Civil Rights, where she managed the Equal Employment Opportunity Program for VDOT. Before becoming a part of the VDOT family, Sandra was appointed to serve as a Director for the Virginia Human Rights Council. Prior to that, she has served as Acting Director and Assistant Director for the Council. Sandra is a Senior Program Administrator with over 30 years in equity, diversity, and inclusion programs in local, state, and federal government. She is a current member of the Asheville Civil Rights Committee, where she serves as a regional representative for the Southeastern Association of State Highway Officials. Sandra graduated from Everett University with a Bachelor's in Business Administration, magna cum laude, and earned her Master's in Business Administration. Please welcome Sandra Norman.
Good afternoon, and thank you so much for that warm introduction. I first want to thank the Office of Civil Rights for hosting this virtual peer exchange and asking me to be a part of it. Today I'm going to talk about the ADA transition plan and give you a brief overview of what we've done at the Virginia Department of Transportation. So the road to the plan. Mind you, this road to the plan started for me. I think I was newly hired at VDOT, probably my second or third day. We had a all hands on deck of the civil rights staff, and FHWA came in and talked to us about really putting the ADA transition focus at the top of where it should have been in the first place. As we know, the ADA is 30 years old, and we were in 2013 and have not had a ADA transition plan accepted. So we just got a general reminder of those legal responsibilities, the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, which made all the programs and services accessible to all. Talked about Title II of the ADA of 1990, with self-evaluation to inventory barriers and how to develop a transition plan. And the DOJ, that joint, FHWA joint memo of 2013, which clarified when deficient ramps must be improved during the paving process. And then we talked about those legal risks, those lawsuits due to noncompliance with the Caltrans lawsuit, and then the Fairfax County, which hit very closely to us in Virginia, because Fairfax County is located in Virginia and right down the road from Richmond. And then what would VDOT's initial action be? We needed to know at that point, had to assemble an advisory team. So we talked about those legal responsibilities. The losses itself were self-explanatory for noncompliance, but what can we proactively do to offset that risk? We had a lot of questions, and no question was not able to be asked. Even if we had to put it over here to the side that we can come back and answer it. And so we knew that VDOT, as large as we were, had some unique challenges due to our vast inventory. But what we needed to do is look past the task, but also focus on what that opportunity ahead would lie for us. So our unique challenges, we had 80,000 miles of curb ramps and 80,000 curb ramps, 4,100 miles of sidewalks. We knew this ADA transition plan was due, but actually it was past due. We talked about those DOJ mandates, that high litigation risk, and we knew that the outcome would be a quality of life for our vulnerable users. And so the biggest barrier we had no inventory and condition. And so how would, again, another question, how would VDOT bring this into compliance? So, question, how did we begin this endeavor? Well, we needed to consider what approach works best for VDOT. Again, there is no one-size-fits-all. We knew that the top-level support was going to be critical. We had to formulate an ADA team, carefully considering who the various players of VDOT would be to assist in this effort. And this consideration, we thought about it, representation of all of departments affected. We needed that special skills and expertise. We needed representatives and insight from the disability community. And then we looked at the reevaluation of the current ADA trainings to include the 504 compliance. We attended those trainings offered from FHWA. We went on the website from FHWA because they provided very valuable resources and tools. And then we also went further once we hired our ADA coordinator to make sure that they got certified under the National Association of ADA Coordinators. That coordinator now, he would have probably been certified, Courtney West, but the COVID hit, so therefore that was postponed. And once he gets his certification, right now there are only 81 certified in the United States. You know, we had to do the provide the public notice of the transition plan efforts, adopt a grievance procedure, conduct that self-evaluation, develop the plan itself. But we needed to start with creating the action plan. How will it be maintained and evaluated? So we knew that VDOT's intent was to adopt a holistic approach to integrate, as we were talking about, the ADA efforts into its projects and processes, which is including the Statewide Transportation Improvement Program known as the STIP. So we also looked at, again, FHWA provided great resources for us. FHWA's Office of Civil Rights had a question and answer about the ADA Section 504, and it specifically discussed this issue and suggested some of the best practices, if you will, of how does the transition plan relate to public agencies' transportation planning process. And we went through that and incorporated that into our plan, and we answered those questions for VDOT. For example, any construction project that is programmed must meet accessibility requirements when built. So VDOT actively does this. All new construction must meet VDOT standards, which incorporate ADA requirements for design features. Another one we looked at is accessibility improvements identified in the transition plan that are not within the scope of an alteration project should be incorporated into the overall transition planning process. This can be accomplished through the development of standalone accessibility projects We did that as well. VDOT does this through ADA standalone projects and programs such as the curb ramp and ASP. So we again, borrowed heavily on the resources that were available to us. And so we know that it's the outline of those 4 key attributes per Code of Federal Regulations. Designate the official responsible, inventory barriers, methods, schedule. We know that those are all important to that ADA transition plan. We knew that the support of the program, we had to have that support from top down as it impacts every aspect of VDOT's businesses. Senior level buy-in was so imperative. These barriers that are major parameters of the transition plan, and each aspect must be addressed. This includes how much of each do we have, is it compliant, if not, how many are non-compliant, and what is the priority, what is the timeline of these alterations? What type of programs do you have or we have already in place, or what kind of programs will we be implementing to not only track inventory or find out about our inventory, but also attract the assessments and improvements? What does the impacted community think about our plan? So we knew we had to have that involvement. And what other resources or advocates will we need input from? What kind of priority? How are we going to look at that schedule? What are we going to do with the alterations that's needed? How does this impact other areas of business? Again, remember, no question. We didn't leave a question on the table. We, again, listed those out so that as we went along this process, we were going to answer all of those. Show me the inventory. You know, in the movie it says, show me the money. Well, we need to show me the inventory of barriers. So starting conditions state of play. Apparently there was some time ago that there was some inventory, but it never materialized through VDOT. I remember division says, well, I remember we did that, but I don't have it. So we weren't able to prove that it was done. And then we didn't have a central repository for the ADA access. So the big challenge was, how do we capture that inventory? 2014, estimated inventory. 2014 to 2017, it evolved and condition captured and work activities. 2018, we started doing the ramp locations and conditions, inventory extraction to meet this transition plan requirements. In 2019, we integrate data sets to create the transition plan. So as you know, again, we're the 3rd largest state DOT, and so VDOT manages a lot of ADA-related traffic assets and facilities. In the past, ADA compliance initiatives, they were really sporadic and mostly managed at project levels. They were funded by individual projects. They're very difficult to track. And it was hard to show for VDOT any substantial compliance. And therefore, I talked about it early in 2014, under the direction of the chief engineer, the former chief engineer, VDOT started a new ADA program with dedicated funding. That was so important, and it continues with dedicated funding to this day. And so because of that huge scope that VDOT had, we decided to adopt a phased approach, phase 1 curb ramps and phase 2 APS, the accessible pedestrian signals. And so from that repository that we didn't have, to that standalone computer system, to it individually being loaded, we have grown so much in our inventory. And so what you see now is a GPS kind of real-time inventory for VDOT, map-based inventory. So what it does is it supports the prioritization. It shows us in our accomplishment and tracking. And it also helps us have internal and external communication. And so we're able to showcase that again now on real time. And so what it looks like when we go and pull our report, what you can see is inventory data shows these 3 pies on your screen, and a total of ADA needs bars as follow. So the left pie that you see is the ADA curb ramp. What it shows is about 58,559 ramps, and we did an estimation of $225 million with a breakdown of those prioritizations. A means there's no deficiency, that's about 14,355. B has minor deficiencies at 27,478. C has major deficiencies, 24,302. And D, no access, 6,779. And so then the center one talks about the sidewalk improvements. It gave us a total of 284 miles. We looked at it at $43 million with a breakdown of the same, no deficiencies, minor deficiencies, major deficiencies, and what that broke down to. And then the third pie chart that you see is dealing with the traffic signals with APS needs, which totaled 1,367 intersections. Again, we looked at the estimated dollar amount of about $27 million. And then we broke that down into Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3, or that was not needed. So finally, estimated typical cost showed that the ADA curb ramp at $4,300 per ramp, sidewalk is about $150 per mile, and APS is at $20,000 per intersection. And earlier I forgot to tell you all who our partner has been with civil rights. So remember I talked about that assembly team, and that assembly team was with civil rights and traffic and engineering, and I could not have asked for a better partner along with this and all the other internal stakeholders at VDOT, but the main two partners were civil rights and traffic and engineering. There would be no acceleration of the data that we have and where we are without traffic and engineering. So I really needed to put a plug in for that division. And so our ADA transition plan schedule, commitment to a timeline, again, this is fluid. So this chart shows the curb ramps with about the $24 million invested and 6,700 plus improvements to date. We began tracking grade C and D improvements around 2013, plan an interim installation milestone around 2035 with the transition to grade B, and completes the installation around 2045. Now I know that's long range, but that's what planning is. Again, this is fluid. This is not something that's going to stay on the shelf. This is almost like our Bible. We are constantly looking at it and constantly evaluating it. The APS shows a $500,000 pilot program that we did, and we began that in 2018 along with tracking of improvements with Tier 1. So around 2028, there is an interim installation milestone to Tier 2, and around 2042 there is another interim installation milestone with start of Tier 3 and a complete installation by 2052. So the sidewalks, we have all of that broken down, but when we got to the facilities, track improvements today shows implementation planning. We're underway with that, and so no transition schedule is listed from what you see now. But it does not include improvements delivered through other Virginia Department of Transportation programs, for example, construction projects. So this kind of gives you some idea of how we are doing that commitment to a timeline. We talked about our internal partners, and let me just tell you, you cannot do a transition plan without your external partners. So we have partnered with another state agency, with DARS, the Virginia Department of Aging and Rehabilitative Services. Another agency we partner with, the Department for the Blind and Vision Impaired, and we often have community roundtables. You know, in the process that we are in now, we have not had one, but we're thinking about doing one virtually. I have not had the opportunity to plan that out, but we still want to keep them involved, and what we've mainly done is through sending email correspondence to make sure that they're still connected about what we're out there doing. Okay, so my fingers got a little fast a minute ago. So VDOT's ADA Transition Plan, current status and results. Spring 2019, VDOT's plan was submitted for final approval. I'm going to change that word from approval to acceptance. And then the summer of 2019, FHWA accepts VDOT's plan. 2019 and onward, we are delivering improvements as outlined in the plan. We track, monitor, and report on progress, so much so that this is a part of my performance metric. And every quarter, the Chief Deputy Commissioner, whom I report to, we have other divisions that we do our performance meetings, and this is one of the performance metrics that I report on. It's the ADA compliance. So I report on 2 of those under the ADA compliance, what we have done in terms of assessment and what we have done in terms of improvement. We do this on a quarterly basis, and so we set a goal out and we measure to what we have set that goal to be. So since the program began tracking, we have approximately 8,500 curb ramp improvements, approximately 48,000 curb ramp assessments, 100 signals with APS deployed. So we are really moving right along with our plan. And so if we had the opportunity to look back, again, before and after improvement with sporadic through isolated projects, with innovation and technology has been the main driver. We have a systematic approach with dedicated funding. Before we had performance and tracking, there was no tracking to prove compliance. Now we have real-time tracking with performance measures, starting from Civil Rights SharePoint database. And that was, again, a standalone system that I sat in the room with some engineers, and they were talking about the design, and I was drawing boxes and squares and circles, and came back and I asked one of my staff members, could you set up a database following this description that I just have in front of you? And that's what she did. Inventory and condition before, no inventory and condition of barriers. And then now, complete statewide inventory of barriers mapped in a cloud. So the inventory has increased, and so our cloud has maintained because the depository was really growing, and it was not going to be able to hold the assessments and improvements. Information sharing, no improvements, information shared to the general public. Now we're proactive with public outreach and stakeholder engagements, inventory viewable to the public. Before, the efficiency and oversight, it was manual. It was inaccurate, inconsistent reporting with very limited oversights. Now it's real-time, mobile, and cloud. 50% staff hours reduced, enhanced program quality and oversight. So it has made all the difference in the world to our field staff. And I couldn't be more appreciative to what the field staff and the districts have done. I mean, it really has made a difference. And at this point, we've partnered too with ITD, the Information Technology Division. They have been a major player in the partnership as well. And so before, the litigation risk was high, and I think now it has reduced, and we have a solid program in place to ensure compliance. And so that program verification, again, FHWA does a tremendous job with resources access, staff that if you run into any problems, they are available to assist you. We did a joint review with FHWA to assess VDOT's compliance, and what the findings were, while we have some things that we needed to tweak, the findings were VDOT's recently established processes are working well, and it also gave the team an understanding of how this process is working as a component of the overall ADA transition plan. And they, in this plan, identified 6 noteworthy practices. So that partnership with FHWA is vitally important. Again, use the resources for your STIP, integrating the ADA into the STIP process, and it may take a little while, but you eventually get there. And so that's all I have. And again, thank you all so much for allowing me to participate.
Thank you, Sandra. That was great. I liked your show me the money comment. Now, now we'll go to our last poll question before we get to questions for Sandra. All right. How does your agency use the ADA transition plan? Please select all that apply. I'll give everyone a few seconds. All right. So we have a good variety here. Thank you for your responses. We hope that you learned something from today's presentations. Sandra?
Yes.
Hold on, I'm looking for the, okay, I'm asking you a question, so I'm looking for the question. Which of the actions that you've discussed has resulted in the biggest impact on transition plan implementation?
I think the biggest one that I've discussed was, again, that top-down support. The support from our commissioner and our chief engineer was so important, and with him making sure that we had dedicated funding, that really elevated this program to the highest level. And so I just think that that top-down approach, that having that support really catapulted what we needed to do and the urgency of the why and what we needed to do.
Okay, thank you. Please talk about VDOT's schedule for completing modifications.
Specifically with regard to, I don't have the specific timeline with me right now, but I can get that information to you. We don't have it like specific to the date, but around the year. So I did one slide, and I'm not savvy enough. Let me see if I can go back to that slide to kind of show you. Let me do this so that I don't hold this up. Is there a specific person asking for that? I'll be more than happy to make sure you get the schedule that we have implemented.
Okay, great. Thank you, Sandra. So I have a question for both panelists. Can the panelists please discuss how their organizations review or monitor barriers that have already been corrected to ensure that curb ramps, sidewalks, etc., maintained to provide ongoing compliance?
Yeah, I can jump in. This is Pete Krause again. So we got a couple of things that we, of course, do, and when we went out and did the original assessment, we got, we took some video, and of course it's, date stamped when all of that was, the original assessment was done, and we've also, we're setting up a system where they double check the inspections to make sure everything is compliant and everything is good to go. So that, that gets, documented into the database. Now, we also have, sort of routine inspections of the system. So if something gets, sort of either broken or, some catastrophic event causes it to be, disrupted versus, some of those things that happen over time happen over a long time. So you don't necessarily, visually pick up on something that's sort of fallen out of compliance. But we're actually in discussion about doing some, follow-up inspections. We also have the tools that could be, I won't guarantee they're implemented, but they could be implemented to sort of back check stuff, particularly if it becomes apparent that there may be some issues again with movement of the soils or whatever sort of catastrophic event that happens to to the system. So some of that's pretty easy to see just from the windshield of the truck. Some of it may be a little more subtle, so it may take a little more quality assurance, I guess, if you will. So hopefully that helps.
Yeah, I think I agree. It's part of that QA/QC. I mean, we're putting it in the inventory. We're checking it. We're looking at it if it's going to need nothing done to it. But that's a good question to start thinking about, how we're going to make sure that what we did and what we checked stays compliant. I think the only way we can really recheck it if we know, as Pete just said, if something major, catastrophic happened in that particular area. We're definitely going to do that as a priority anyway. But going forward, is there a time frame that we need? Again, those kinds of questions that we need to build into the fluidity of the transition plan. Great question.
Thank you both. Well, we are getting close to the end, so we have to wrap it up. Thank you, Pete and Sandra. This has been a great discussion. Thank you all for participating. This webinar has been recorded and will be posted in the future. Special thanks to our speakers, Sherry Schaffline, Pete Krause, and Sandra Norman, and to our partners at ASHTO, Irene Rico, and the civil rights community. Please make sure to register for our next upcoming webinar on October 28th. The topic will be dedicated ADA funding. Thank you again, and enjoy the rest of your day.